Hello everybody and welcome back to the channel. Today we are doing another One Piece review and discussion and whatever you want to call it. We are doing Act 1 of Wano. So at this point in filming the video, I'm up to chapter 925, I believe it is, which is just when Act 1 of Wano ended, and it made sense that this would be the time I talk about it. Now, we got some pretty interesting moments in this Act 1 so far. We got to the moment where everyone gets reunited, everyone comes back together, that was nice. We reunite with the Heart Pirates, Luffy and Kaido have their first interaction, and we get a lot of information about the land of Wano, how it all works, how it fits into Kaido's plan, how it fits in with the smile fruits, the fake devil fruits, and we start seeing some of the beast pirates that have been taking these smile fruits. But more than that, we also get a lot of plot threads thrown out, which I'll talk about. I've now got all the colored panels that I've saved, because if you missed my last video, I'm reading the official Shonen Jump black and white version, but I can't save those panels to put them up and talk about it, so I'm also going through and saving the colored version so I can put them up and talk about them. So the first thing I want to talk about is the general vibe of Wano, what I think will happen, and just how I've been experiencing it so far in the first 20-something chapters. And I want to do this because I'm getting very reminiscent feelings of the Summit War where Ace died, right? There are a lot of similarities so far in Wano in this setup, and there seems to be a lot of people talking about, like the little girl bringing up Ace, or her guardian bringing up Ace, or, they've brought up the Summit War a couple of times, including Trafalgar Law has also brought up the Summit War, and how this battle is going to be something to the similar size of the Summit War, and they're talking about, all the people that they're bringing, and they're talking about all the people Kaido's got and he'll be bringing to these fights. And they're also talking about something called the Raid, which is something that I have heard about. And the reason I bring this up, and I bring up the Summit War and Ace and all of the references that they're doing and how this feels kind of similar to the Summit War with Ace, is I am concerned that maybe someone will die here. I'm not calling it, it's not an official prediction, but I'm just saying that there seems to be a lot of references back to that big, massive period in time. And now that we know that the next saga is called The Final Saga, if somebody was to die in a big, epic way, it would make sense that it happens right before the end, because this is pretty much like we're coming up to the end, right? So that's a general vibe, that's just a general feeling that's kind of gnawing in my back of the head as I'm like reading this stuff, and they're like, oh, let's talk about Ace some more, let's talk about Summit War, let's talk about how similar this is going to be to the Summit War. I just have this feeling, I'm like, is somebody gonna die here? Because I did always expect Usopp to die, right? Like if you go back and you watch my earlier videos, I did always expect Usopp to sacrifice himself in a big heroic way. And it would be kind of like a culmination of his character arc of wanting to become, this big grandiose hero. How does a hero die? In a heroic way, right? So I did always think of Usopp was going to be someone that would sacrifice himself towards the end of the story. So, I am getting this vibe that someone might die here, and I was always expecting Usopp to sacrifice himself since the beginning of the story. But now that I look back on that Usopp theory, I'm kind of like, maybe the story will end with Usopp telling this story as an old man to some, group of kids or something in his village, and he's married to that girl again, but the kids don't believe him. They're just like, oh, that Usopp, he's always been a liar. There's no way these stories he's telling us are true, but it's actually Usopp telling the story of Luffy and all of this stuff that they did. Now that I think about it, that would actually be such a beautiful ending to this story. But I've also heard other theories that maybe this whole story is a song sung by Brook. I don't particularly believe that. I don't particularly see that coming to fruition, but like with Usopp, I would see it. Alright, next, let's talk about the Kaido and Luffy, their confrontation, their first encounters, all that kind of stuff. First of all, so this is what happens after Luffy and Kaido have their fight, and Kaido just smashes Luffy one shot, knocks him out, and he has the line, so after Luffy's been like, I'm gonna be king of the pirates, Kaido then smashes him with his club, and he's like, what king was that, boy? And it just seems like such an epic moment that, Luffy, who we've seen take on these incredibly powerful people, just gets smashed and knocked out with one blow. And this is also after we see Luffy, like, punch Kaido out of the sky as he's a dragon and then just, like, start pummeling him. Kaido gets up and it's just like, boom, you know, you're nothing compared to me. So it's going to be really interesting to see how they get around that power indifference, even though now we know that the longer Luffy fights someone that is at a higher power level to him, the stronger he will become, because he's, like, putting up with that. He's, you know, matching that power, or slowly building up to match that power. So it will be really interesting to see how they make this victory feel earned and not just out of the blue, because that is something that Oda does quite well, actually, is he makes everything feel earned and not just, like, randomly like, oh yeah, I'm the hero, therefore I win. Alright, next I want to talk about this little girl, right? Because if you are a writer, there are some things that you should desperately learn how to do from Oda, from One Piece. And this is one of those things that you should just absolutely try your hardest to learn how to do. And that is to instantly make people become emotionally invested in your characters, right? Like, that is an insanely difficult thing to do. And Oda just does it constantly. Every single arc, every single just story, country we're in, whatever. He just has this ability to make you so emotionally invested in his characters so quickly. And this is such a great example of it. We see Luffy and the little girl, right? They meet, and essentially all that happens is Luffy saves this little girl from, you know, going back to all the stuff that they said that they were going to do to her. And to Luffy, it was nothing. It was literally nothing for Luffy, right? These were just mild level thugs that he was able to just, like, and, you know, that's it. So to Luffy, it really was nothing. But this little girl was like, you're hungry, let me take you back and feed you. And so she gives Luffy the bit of rice, and it just seems like nothing. Like, it's us as the reader, and we're just sitting here and we're like, oh, okay, cool, yeah, you know, this little girl, you fed Luffy some rice, blah blah blah, whatever. But then her carer breaks in and is like, what are you doing? Why have you eaten the rice? And we get the story about how this rice is so important. She only gets it on her birthday and the New Year's, and she's gone down to the poison river to drink the poison water to stop her stomach from gurgling because it's a warrior's greatest shame. And she becomes instantly very sick. And we get that emotional connection of, like, her sacrificing the one tiny ounce of happiness that she has in her life by getting this tiny little bowl of rice once a year or twice a year, and she gives it to Luffy because that's everything that she has to offer. And that's everything that she has to offer. She gives it to Luffy, and it just makes it so emotionally invested, or investing for the reader, that this little girl is giving everything that she's got to somebody that we like, and is making herself sick to give him everything. And it's just so difficult. It is such a difficult thing to get people to emotionally invest in your characters. And it takes a long time. Like, you get authors like The Wheel of Time, right? Where it's like 14 books long. People will finish those series and still not even be emotionally invested in those characters, right? So for Oda to have done this in less than a chapter, right? In less than a chapter, you are now willing to die for this little girl, and Luffy is off on a cross-country expedition to find her a doctor. It's just one of those amazing things that he does so well. And once I'm all caught up to One Piece, I actually want to do a video on, like, the things I learnt as an author from One Piece, like the things that you should learn or could learn, and the things that I have learnt from it. And this is one of the massive things that he does so well. This one here I actually thought was a really interesting panel while we're talking about Luffy and the little girl. The panel where they talk about, you know, the little girl's waiting for Ace to come back because she's going to become a bewitching shinobi, and she is going to join his crew, right? And in that moment, you see Luffy frowning, and he's just like, Ace is dead, right? And he's just, like, blunt, and he just comes out, and it's so easy for us to think, like, Luffy, like, come on, man, that's kind of rough. This little girl is, like, dying. This little girl's very sick, and you're just gonna drop the A-bomb on her? You're just gonna drop the Ace is dead on her? Like, that's pretty rough, man. But to me, it comes more across as, like, Luffy needs to say it for himself. He needs to hear it for himself. He's come to terms with it, and he needs to say it. Like, Ace is dead. It's like he has to say it for himself. To me, I get much more of that than Luffy is just being a jerk, I guess, is what you could say. He's just like, oh, screw this little girl. Yeah, Ace is dead. Like, I get a lot more of, like, Luffy needed to say it for himself. And again, this is another moment that ties into what I was saying earlier about the Summit War and how everything is kind of tying back to that and everything's giving off that vibe. And there's a reason, you know, Oda's bringing these memories back to the front of our minds. It's like when we first saw Sabo again, just before he got into the arena, just before that moment, you know, they started talking about Luffy's childhood again. And it was like, oh, this is random that they're just randomly bringing up Luffy's childhood again. We haven't heard anything about this in 100 chapters. But it was because they wanted Luffy's childhood fresh in your mind. So when the reveal that Sabo was, you know, the other gladiator, it would be like a big boom. Oh, wow, Sabo, I remember Sabo. These things are all fresh in my mind. So that's my concern with this. This, I thought, was just a cool Luffy-Zoro moment, and it is a good segue into talking about Basil Hawkins and how he's working for Kaido and all that. But I liked this moment. You know, Zoro's there and he's like, this is what Kinemon said, Luffy, don't cause a fuss. And then Luffy's like, okay then, our choice is clear. We'll apologize to him later. I just thought that that was such a classic Luffy-Zoro moment and I had to include it. But it also segues us into Basil Hawkins and how he is working for Kaido. And we also get to see his, like, strawman powers, how he's using the straw sword. And he has those nails that are made out of the sea stone because sea stone originally comes from Wano, which is some nice world building. But we also get to see a bit of his powers on display, like when he, you know, Zoro goes to slice him and instead of slicing him, he has the wicker straw man substitution jutsu thing where he has one of his followers take the cut instead of him. So that was a cool little moment. It's nice that we keep seeing all of these people from this generation. Like, I believe at the end of Act 1, we see Eustace Kid stuck in the jail with Luffy as well. So that'll be really interesting to find out how he ended up there and how he will no doubt join with Luffy and Law to do this big fight and maybe the raid. One of the things that I kept hearing about when I first started my One Piece journey was, will the raid fail? And apparently that was some kind of big controversial topic to talk about or something. So it'll be really interesting to go in there and see what happens and see, like, you know, what exactly caused all that divisive controversy or whatever. So I'm really looking forward to that. I thought this moment was actually particularly interesting and I wanted to bring it up because one of my original theories was that Luffy would die at the end of the story, right? Like, he would sacrifice himself, he would get, like, sick or something, and he would sacrifice himself to allow his crew to get away, because once he has One Piece, which I imagine is the lost history of the world, it's all that information, the government would come after him, and his heart would be failing from all the times that he had to use all of his gear stuff, and like, whatever. I'll explain all my theories later. But essentially, one of my theories was that Luffy would become very sick and start dying, and he would sacrifice himself or give himself over to the Marines in order to let his crew get away. And this was a really interesting point when we see Basil Hawkins, and he says, the cards say your probability of being alive 1 month from now is 19%. Now, obviously, that could just mean nothing. That could be basic, you know, hero stuff like, oh, you know, we've got 0.5% chance to navigate ourselves through an asteroid field. But obviously, that's all they need. They only need a 0.5% chance. Or this could very much be leaning into my theory of, like, Luffy dying at the end. So it's always nice to just get some kind of little forms of validation like this. So at the end, if I'm like, I fucking knew it, I could be like, do you remember that time Basil Hawkins said he only had 19% chance to live? But that's not actually how I want the story to end. I actually want the story to end something like this. So this happens near the beginning of the thing. And Luffy says, I'm glad to know they're all doing well. Once we've gone around the world, we should pay them all a visit again. Right? Now, this is how I actually want One Piece to end. I would love it if he was King of the Pirate and he just got a whole heap of money. And he essentially did another lap of the Red Line. Sorry, not the Red Line, the Grand Line. He essentially does another lap of the Grand Line and just, like, fix everything that he broke along the way, right? Because he's been destroying towns, he's been, you know, he'll run out of restaurants and stuff without paying, he'll, like, destroy someone's house or someone's farm or, like, whole buildings and towns and stuff. So it'd be really nice to see him just like go back with Frankie and Usopp, who are like builders, right? And just go back and like pay for the meals he ran out on, rebuild the towns he broke down, rebuild the houses, anything that he destroyed along the way. It'd just be so wholesome of an end of a story for him to just like go back and pay off all those debts, so to say. And I think a really good example of that is when we first see Ace and Luffy's at like a restaurant and Smoke is chasing Luffy and Ace is also looking for Luffy and Luffy's there eating, and then Smoker comes there and Ace comes and they like run out on the meal and they destroy this guy's restaurant. Like, I think that is a good example of what I'm talking about. It'd be nice to see them go back and like rebuild that place, pay off their debts, and just karmically reset themselves, so to say. All right, so I don't just want to keep rambling on too much about nothing here. Let me just sum up so far what I find about Wano. I've already talked about the general vibe. There's been a lot of great world building, everything to do with the factories and the class divide and the poison water and the poison food and all that. It makes for a very engaging environment. It makes for very empathetic people. It makes for like a story that will be interesting to tell, even if it's just about the area. So I think the world building's been fantastic. I think the general vibe is good. I really want to see some cool Zoro stuff, right? I mean, like, we're in the land of samurai, so I'm really hoping that we see some cool Zoro stuff, right? Like, he's about to get, hopefully Luffy gives him that sword that Luffy has, the cursed super sword, the one of the Mastercraft swords or whatever it is. So I'm hoping that Zoro will get those, so he'll have, like, 3. I believe he'll have 2 Master Swords and 1 Legendary Sword at that point. And I really hope we get to see some cool Zoro stuff. I'm really looking forward to find out more about the raid because, like I said, I had heard there was some kind of controversial opinions about it or something, so it'll be really interesting to find out more about that. I'm thinking someone might die, but I'm really hoping it's not one of the Straw Hats. I'm hoping it might be Trafalgar Law. Not that I'm saying that I hope Trafalgar Law dies, but I'm hoping that, if everything kind of goes to hell at the end, he would be the one to use his ability and he's like, get out of here, guys. I'll do something with my thing that I can do and I'll save the day, but in turn kill myself. So I guess only time will tell. I'll see you next week. Thanks for watching this video. Thanks for keeping up with me on my One Piece journey. Like the video, subscribe to the channel, leave me a comment. And if this is your first video you've watched, I've got a whole bunch of other One Piece content. Go check it out. As always, thank you very much.